We've got another luxury sports sedan comparison, the Acura TLX Type S and the Genesis G70 Sport Prestige 3.3T. Both of these cars are fully loaded for under $60,000. They've got all-wheel drive, turbocharged V6 engines with more than 350 horsepower and are a ton of fun to drive. They also look pretty great inside and out. How do they compare? They are so neck and neck. Let's find out. The TLX Type S and the G70 3.3T Sport Prestige represent the quickest and best handling cars these companies build. I compared the Type S on the track and it held up lap after lap, but that was against the Lexus IS 350. Now it's running with a G70. Right off the line, it's the G70 that feels like the quicker car. All-wheel drive, but I feel like I'm almost kind of being pulled side to side. It does not restrict the turbo boost the way the Acura does, even when the wheels are turned. It's kind of funny. Definitely more entertaining when you definitely come from a stop. I like that. When you're already up to speed in the mid-range, I think these cars are really comparable. And the G70 is down 2 gears, but the Acura at those top 2 are really overdrive, really the top 3 or 4. Because that car is shifting very quickly from, say, 1st to 4th gear. But the benefits of having the 10-speed versus the 8-speed, I don't really think it matters at all. Not the way the gear ratios are spaced here. And the shift response, just like the Acura, is fantastic. That's Sport mode. I go to Sport Plus, and it's definitely a little rougher, just like the TLX. So these cars truly are neck and neck. If we were to do a drag race, which we can't, we're on public roads, we're not gonna do that type of crazy stuff. It would be hard for one car to pull away from the other. It truly would. Very, very comparable in every way. What I do notice is that the G70 is a louder car, and not just because it has an active exhaust, just tire noise. A little more wind noise coming through this cabin. The Acura is more hushed, and the Acura also does ride better. The adaptive dampers on that car, when you're in comfort mode, it definitely just feels more comfortable and soft, more pliable. On the G70, in comfort mode, I would still call it stiff. Not overly so, but noticeably stiff. So if you want really a nicer commuter car to just drive around town in, and then occasionally kind of blast on some back roads when you're having some fun, the TLX might be your better bet. In terms of steering, that's also a toss-up. The G70 has a very organic feel, and by that I mean it kind of feels like an older hydraulic system. You're getting just enough vibrations, perfect weighting. There's really no vagueness at all off-center. Just the perfect amount so it doesn't feel twitchy. I really, really like it. Is it better than the Acuras? I'd say no. What I will say is that the G70's smaller size, again, this is 10 inches shorter than that TLX. I think it makes this car feel more nimble. And even though the interiors are roughly the same size, because I don't have that big giant hood on the TLX, which looks really cool when it's parked, this car is more immediate, it's more placeable. And that means that even though it doesn't have the double front wishbone suspension of the Acura, the Genesis is the car that I'd rather pick on these narrower roads. The downside, at least when you're talking about differentials, is that the Acura has a mechanical torque vectoring system. It works a lot faster, it's more reactive. Here, it's a brake-based torque vectoring system, so it's applying brakes when you're going around turns, which essentially slows you down. And not only that, wears out your pads quicker. But even so, none of these things really get in the way when you're driving the G70. It's sure-footed, it doesn't roll, and I do like the way this engine note is. I truly do. I think it's just a bit louder than that TLX. I really like the intake. There's no fake sounds being pumped in here. They're off. You can set them on the touchscreen. It's just not necessary. So even though the G70 is louder, even in comfort mode, when you're just driving on the highway or commuting or going around town, I prefer it on the back roads because this engine is great. Really, Genesis has fantastic suspension tuning. You gotta hand it to them. Acura too, but Acura and Honda have been doing this a whole lot longer. Genesis is right up there. Fantastic. The great thing about sports sedans is they sit low. So say if you're getting off an exit, you don't have to decelerate as quickly because your center of gravity is just perfect. And in this car, God, it just goes. And it's so balanced through every turn too. Really, you can just point, click, done. Now the brakes, I actually don't like them as much as the Acura. That one has a more sophisticated system. The TLX accelerates smoother. It's more gentle with the thrust. Definitely easier to place out of corners, especially from a stop. I just feel like this car is in more control, which is a nice thing. Not quite as fun off the line, but definitely feels a little more stable. The sound on this engine is nice. But it doesn't seem to quite shift as quickly, even though Acura has programmed the Type S to have 30 to 40% quicker upshifts and downshifts than the regular TLX with the naturally aspirated V6. Yeah, I just don't really feel the same response from these paddle shifters. So with this car, it's usually better just to keep it in D or S. The boost is there, it just doesn't feel as strong. This is all relative because it's still a very quick car. But compared to that G70, you don't really get that infusion of turbo boost slamming through your body. Maybe that's not really an infusion, it's more of just an onrush, an onslaught of torque. The Acura is just more mitigated, and it's definitely more refined, because when you switch to just the comfort mode, everything just seems to settle a little bit more. There's still a decent amount of tire noise, but in terms of the engine sound, the wind noise, it's more damped, it really is. Acura really sweated the small stuff that Genesis did not, namely a double wishbone front suspension. Because with this car on the back roads, it does feel more sure-footed. It's more stable. This car is several inches wider, so that alone helps. But the double wishbone setup is why this car is kind of space compromised inside, because that setup has a lot of intrusion into the cabin, which is why you'll see it in sports cars that don't really prioritize interior space. So to see it on a mainstream luxury sedan is kind of shocking in a good way. I've driven this car on a racetrack. Check out the video. Same exact car, performed flawlessly. The handling for a front-wheel drive based car to start is actually pretty good. The weight distribution is not as good as what you'd find in the G70, but Acura makes up for that with steering that's just honestly tracks so perfectly. Great weighting. It does feel a little lighter in terms of weighting than the G70, but the response off center is even sharper. I can just feel the tires just moving very incrementally with just the tiniest of movement. That means placing this thing through corners is even better. Feels a little flatter too. And again, the G70 doesn't roll that much, but this Acura, the width and the way the suspension is set up, it's definitely a little bit elevated, I gotta say. The engine's good, but again, it's the gearbox that kind of holds it back. It's just not as quick shifting as it should be, to my taste. Occasionally you can catch it off guard. Again, there's just so many gears here, 10. Like, how do you even manage 10 gears? You wouldn't on your own, but here it's like the car's computers are good, but they sometimes get in the way. But in the right gear, when you're in the right power band, it's fantastic. And again, hardly any lean, any body roll in terms of pitch diving when braking. It's like this car is really composed well. Now, if I go back to normal, or heck, let's go to comfort. On a rough road with 20-inch tires, it definitely feels cushier. It does. It's not the type of car that you'll mistake for a Lexus, but it's notably better than the G70 in terms of ride comfort and isolation from the bad parts of the road. There's certain parts of the road on a sports sedan that you want to feel, and there's things that you really would rather not. The Acura does do the better job there. So the TLX definitely has some sharper reactions. Not by a ton, but just a little bit of finesse here and there. What it is though, it's the engine sound and the gearbox response and a lot of the other modes that kind of detract from the experience, and the fact that I don't feel like the engine is totally giving me all the boost that's truly capable of. That G70 just has a more raw feeling. The TLX kind of dials it back. It's more reserved. It's certainly more of an everyday luxury car. And tight turns, this is where the TLX really shines. Sport Plus and Sport mode. You can definitely carry a lot more speed in the TLX on tight turns. And that mechanical torque vectoring system really does work magic. When coming to a stop, the brake pedal feel is definitely firmer, and it's derived from the NSX supercar that's sadly no longer in production, but this braking system is that car in this sedan. For 2024, the Acura TLX has a slightly different grille. It's supposed to be frameless. It looks the same to me. This car is aggressive. It's longer. The hood is definitely more extended than the G70, and as such, it feels like it has a greater road presence, like a mid-size sedan. Now, the wheels are even larger. They're 20 inches. I love how they look here in this black finish, and they are red Brembo brake calipers, just like the G70, 4 pistons up front. But the way the TLX is designed, especially from the side, it almost seems to compress the rear doors. It just really is pushing that cab so much further back, but part of that is due to the double wishbone front suspension, which is larger and more intrusive, so Acura kind of had to design it this way. Nose to tail, the G70 has more classic proportions than the Acura. Everything just feels lower, it feels smaller and tidier, the way older sports sedans used to be. And in the front, it's very modern, big oversized grille that's not too crazy looking, really. It's toned down, it's darker chrome, it has that home plate look, and next to the double bar LED lights and turn signals, truly a striking effect. This is a classy looking car. It's riding on 19-inch wheels no matter which trim you get. And on this top trim, red Brembo brake calipers, 4 pistons up front, 2 in the back. This car does mean business, and every angle, well, looks pretty damn sharp to me. Just like the front of the TLX, there's a ton of aggression out back, and it also feels wider with these taillights that kind of spread out like a racetrack. There's a black deck lid spoiler, 4 very large exhaust tips, and a rear diffuser. And some of these parts can be ordered by Acura to be carbon fiber. Now on the Genesis, it's a lot more subdued and sedate. Looks more like a traditional luxury car. And this 3.3T looks exactly the same as the base 2.5T. So you're getting big oval exhaust tip openings, smaller LED lights that echo that double bar effect in the front, and a deck lid spoiler that's integrated into the trunk. It's not really separate. So this car looks like it's got some big add-ons for performance. This one really looks like a traditional luxury car. While the interiors have roughly the same volume, it's the exteriors that are very different. The TLX is 10 inches longer than a G70. That's massive. 1.5 inches longer in the wheelbase, and it's also 2.5 inches wider. But it's the Genesis that sits about 1.3 inches lower, the roof height. That's why that car feels a little sportier when you're next to it. But the width on this Acura and that big nose, that's definitely imposing in person. Here's what the extra money buys you for that performance. On the Acura, it's a 3-liter single-turbo V6. On the Genesis, a 3.3-liter twin-turbo V6. The Genesis has the edge in horsepower and torque, as you can see. Both are very healthy. 8-speed automatic on the Genesis, a 10-speed on the Acura. But the Acura is front-wheel drive based to start. They're both all-wheel drive, but the Genesis is a rear-wheel drive car. That means it's inherently more balanced. At least it should be on paper. Check out the fuel economy. Probably want to look away. These numbers are not very good at all. These two suck down premium gas at a high rate, but that's what you're getting with all this power. What you're also getting? Special axles. On the Acura, a mechanical torque vectoring rear axle that can shift torque independently left and right, and on the Genesis, a limited slip differential. Trunk space is at a premium when you go compact. On the Genesis side, it's only 10.5 cubic feet, and 13.5 with the Acura. That's significant enough where you can pack a lot more deeper into the trunk. This red interior, it's pretty classy, not as bright as the red as you would get in that G70 if you order it as an option. And while these seats don't automatically adjust the bolsters in sport mode, they move in more ways, 16 ways in total, plus it has a power thigh extension. The TLX is more space age inside here than the Genesis. It's got a central drive mode selector that's front and center. And while the PRN-D selector is very confusing and very easy to misshift by mistake, it does look cool. But by cool, I mean it's probably going to go out of style in 5 to 6 years. The Type S does include high-quality materials, like the curved metal on the dash, the beautiful red stitching, the micro-suede inserts on the seats, and a flat-bottom steering wheel that feels excellent. The driving position is good, but I sort of feel like I'm a little higher, especially with this hood, so I really would like to be sitting lower. The front seats are very comfortable. You can even adjust this one, the passenger seat, with these buttons on the side. That helps if you have someone in the rear. And you don't really want to sit back there because there's not a ton of room. Genesis prefers a simpler interior design, but it gets a little dressier and classier, like the quilted stitching on the door panels and on the seat inserts. The leather is just as soft, but overall, the design here, I just think it's going to age a lot better 10 years from now. To me, the G70 has the more perfect seating position. I feel like I'm a little lower, more situated lower to the ground than that Acura, and it just feels more classic. Despite being longer in length and the wheelbase, the backseat is just as tight in the TLX as the G70. And would you believe it, there's 2.5 inches fewer legroom than an Integra. The backseat is very comfortable. These seats feel almost as comfortable as those up front, but it's just as tight back here as the Acura. And truly, there's no toe room. My toes are jammed underneath this seat in a way that I have never felt before. And also, there's no heated outboard rear seats, and they used to be included on this trim. The Acura uses a 12.3-inch non-touchscreen. It uses a touch pad, and you have to keep your finger exactly in the right spot and hold it there. This kind of seemed like at first it would be less distracting, but you're actually looking away more, and it's not as simple to use as it might seem. For example, in wireless Apple CarPlay, which the Genesis doesn't have, well, try to navigate this with just a touchpad. Well, now I'm actually not holding and tapping. I actually have to drag my finger. So it's just kind of weird. You get used to it. And navigation, well, it's included here. That's nice. There's also an ELS stereo, which sounds very good, better than the Lexicon system in the Genesis. 27 different ambient lighting options, which I absolutely like, that the fact that you have different themes, especially all the Wall Street. That's kind of funny. But the ambient lighting is nice in this car. And on this side, you can adjust different settings. Very limited. You got maps, a clock, and other Apple CarPlay or audio information. I really do wish there were some better in-car apps. But the real issue is that the fact that this interface really needs a redo. The digital instrument panel is more full-featured than that in the G70, although you can't see full-screen maps, but it's definitely nicer than having a half-digital, half-analog setup like in that car. But I do wish there was more functionality. The only real changes are when you switch driving modes. The G70 has a 10.3-inch touchscreen that's modeled after Hyundai and Kia models. That's not terrible because it's using a unique color scheme, and navigation with 3 years of map updates is included, so that's nice. Plus, I like the fact that there's shortcut buttons down here. These are now toggle switches for 2024, but they look and they feel even better than before. And it's nice when you don't want to just have a touchscreen, including for volume and seek. I love the fact that Genesis still uses this. There's not a lot of in-car apps, but for example, if you want to change all of the driving settings, including a lot of the forward collision alert and standard safety systems, including highway driving assist on these upper models, you got tons of information there for you. This climate touchscreen, it looks nice. It's got haptic feedback and you can adjust the heated and the cooled seats. There's also other buttons nearby, but truly, this feels cheaper than before. I really like what Genesis used to do. So this really isn't an upgrade, it's just a difference. The G70 has a half-digital instrument panel. It's 8 inches, also encompasses the tachometer, and it's got an analog speedometer, which I think looks better. So I wish they would just go one or the other. For example, you cannot see the highway driving assist in a big full screen mode. You see it here, but really it's no bigger than previous G70 models were, with just the smaller screen. But the best feature? This. Blind spot monitoring and a live feed on either side of the mirrors. This is awesome, truly. The 2024 Acura TLX starts at $45,000. There are 3 trims. The Type S with extra charge paint was $58,795 with destination. The 2024 Genesis G70 starts at $41,500. There's 4 trims, and the 3.3T Sport Prestige all-wheel drive you see here is $58,350 with destination. These two couldn't be any closer in price. The TLX Type S has the technical advantages. The steering is a bit sharper, the suspension a bit more sorted, and certainly more compliant on rougher surfaces. But the Genesis G70 feels like it's chomping at the bit. It is truly the more exciting car, and among these two, which are meant to be driver's cars, this one continues to wow me and the rest of the CarGurus team many years after its debut. But what do you think? Go to CarGurus.com to search for these cars and check out our YouTube channel and subscribe for more luxury car and SUV comparisons all the time. We'll see you next time.